Welcome to Parenting GPS, navigating your parenting journey. I'm Kari Kling, the host of your show. I'm thrilled to bring you our very first Father's Day edition of Parenting GPS to honor the fathers in the world, to honor the role that fathers play in our lives, and how we can look at that role and say, how do we support fathers to help them to be the kind of dad that they always wanted to be? And my guest today to help us do that is Alec Lace, the host and creator of First Class Fatherhood. And if you have not listened to any of his podcasts, he is amazing. And by the time the show is over, you're going to want to run to your device and start to listen to him after you listen to this show. And so I'd like to take a moment and introduce Alec to you. My son's name is Alex. So if I say that incorrectly, I'm not doing it on purpose. To you right now. Alec Lace is the father of four who in 2018 launched the now popular podcast, First Class Fatherhood, with a vision to change the narrative of fatherhood and family life. The show quickly became one of the top parenting podcasts in America due to interviewing some of the most famous fathers in the world, including, and I'm going to read my list to you, Kurt Warner, Steve Harvey, Deion Sanders, Tom Brady, Dr. Drew, Tony Hawk, Dr. Ben Carson, Lou Holtz, Dr. Oz, Donny Osmond. I had to get that one in there. I had posters of him in my room when I was a teenager. Kyle Petty, James Patterson, and the list goes on and on. He has interviewed over 700 high-profile dads, military people, astronauts, sports figures, doctors. Wait till you see some of the people that he's interviewed. Alec does all of this while continuing to be a dedicated railroad mechanic, a position he has held for 20 years. And he even drives Uber on weekends as a way to further spread his message. First Class Fatherhood can be heard each week on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, and iTunes. Please help me welcome Alec to this show. Alec, thank you so much for being here.
Kari, it's an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And Alec, we talked a little bit before we started recording. Your audience, your podcast is massive in terms of appeal, in terms of your message. How did this begin, and where did this passion come from?
Well, Kari, I'm a father of four, like you mentioned there at the top, and fatherhood is something that's the most important thing in my life. And I do drive Uber on the weekends. And a lot of the times, whenever I was telling the young men that would come into the car that I had four kids, they always looked at me like I had four heads. They were always like, four kids. They're like, I would never want to do that. I can't take care of myself. I can't imagine. I had all these excuses and reasons why they would never want to have kids. And I would always try to turn that mindset around in the short drive that we had by saying, like, hey, listen, this isn't going to be the end of the world for you. This is actually when your life's going to begin. Fatherhood's something to embrace, not something to avoid. And so I would constantly have the same conversation over and over again. It was like, man, I should put this on tape, And I didn't even know what a podcast was at the time. But once I seen that what it is, I thought this would be a great way to actually put this message out there about fatherhood, because we got a fatherless crisis going on in our country. So many kids are growing up without a father or a father figure in their life. And in my opinion, it's the number one social issue we have going on in our country. And if we could get more dads involved in their kids' lives, I think so much of the trouble we're seeing in our country would go away.
I agree with you. And in the second segment, we're really going to dive into this fatherless crisis, as you call it, and talk about some statistics and talk about, how did we get to this point? But before we get to that, I want to ask you, you've interviewed over 700 high profile dads. And I'm curious, if you could if you think about it, what are some of the common themes that you find that all of the dads that you have interviewed talk about or are concerned about? Do you see some common threads, and what would they be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say number one is that nobody's actually really ready. Like it's very, I think maybe I'd have to look through to see. I think there was like one who was like, yeah, I'm right. I was so ready to have kids. Like most people are not ready. We always think like, oh, I'm going to wait until I have this, all my ducks in a row. But most of us aren't ready when this comes to us. And it's such a life changing event. So everybody kind of shares that in common. But a lot of it, Kari, for over and over from the dads is being able to adapt to the situation. Like our kids are going to be interested in things that we're not interested in. We're going to be placed in situations that make us uncomfortable. So we have to kind of adapt to all that new change. Always hear things like bend and don't break. Like be willing to change the rules if your kid can make a decent argument, and but not compromise your morals while doing so. So be able to change when you can, and then also too, a lot is being calm, especially calm is contagious. So when things start to go crazy, try to stay as calm as you can. I mean, these are things that we're trying to do as dads, each and every day, just trying to get a little better than we were yesterday, because my oldest is 17 right now. I never had a 17-year-old. He just turned 17 a couple of weeks ago, and so this is all new territory for me. So each stage of this whole game is brand new, and it's helpful to look to people who have been where you are and try to take as many lessons as you can from them and incorporate it into your own parenting style as well. And a lot of dads are willing to do that.
Well said. And, I always talk about parenting obviously doesn't come with a manual. I'm working on one, though. I'm working on a book. It doesn't come with a manual. And I think it's a little different for moms than it is for dads. And you're the expert on this. I'm not a dad, but what I find is that more moms are willing to reach out and say, I need help. I don't know what to do. Whereas maybe sometimes dads aren't as easy to do that. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I found that out too, starting the podcast too. Like a lot of people, I was surprised by how many people would listen to the podcast, but don't reach out, don't respond, because it's not something that most men do. It's like talking about your feelings and your emotions is not something that men are likely to ever do, but they will listen in on a conversation between two men talking about a topic that they are interested in, which is the reason why podcasts, I think, have become so successful, particularly with men, young men in this country, because they love to be able to listen to it without having to admit that they're having this issue, or admit that they sympathize with what the context of the conversation is, but they definitely are willing to listen. But I agree. And when I started out, I looked at the podcast, kids and family parenting genre, and it's just dominated by mom podcasts. Like there was tons of them. Now there's a lot more dad podcasts that have come on the scene, but when I started it, there were very, very few.
Yeah, and what a gift you are to the world and all of the people that you've interviewed. And so we're going to go ahead and take a break, Alec. And when we come back, we're going to delve into what you call the fatherless crisis. Why is it happening, and what can we do about it? We'll be right back. So let's talk about this fatherless crisis, if I may. And one of the things that I know you talk about in your book, Alec, and you talk about on your podcast is how many dads are missing in action, if you will, in the lives of so many children. In fact, you mentioned, I want to get this quote correct. You said that more than 1 in 4 children live in a home without a father. Tell us more about the fatherless crisis, what you are seeing, and why it's so important that we wake up and dads become more involved.
Well, unfortunately, America leads the world in fatherless households. So it's an epidemic in our country. And just like you said, the numbers are like 26, 27%. They are staggering. And it correlates with just about every single negative thing that's happening in our society. That's why I say I think it's the number one social issue, just because you can't begin to have these conversations about poverty, about homelessness, about crime, about drug use, about suicides, pregnancies. You can't have any of those conversations without talking about the fatherless crisis, because they're connected to all of them, and we are filling up our prison systems in this country with fatherless young men. They are the most common character that is headed to prison. I've interviewed wardens of the prison. I've interviewed inmates themselves. Everywhere I like, interviewing police officers that are on the street, interviewing former gang members. it's always the same story. And it's usually a young kid that had no father influence in his life, ended up getting with the wrong crowd, and then ends up in the penitentiary. And it's not, and I always get the blowback a lot of times from single moms. And it seems like it's hard to have this conversation without offending. People takes offense to this conversation as if it's something we shouldn't talk about, and they see it as a slight to single moms. And I have nothing but the most respect for single moms that are out there. I know a lot of single moms, but they reach out to me all the time and take this as almost an attack, saying, "Hey, I raised my kids by myself, and they turned out to be okay, so you're wrong." And I usually respond to that by saying, my grandfather smoked cigarettes till he was 86 years old, and he never had a health problem. We don't say that smoking cigarettes is now a good thing because he did it. There's outliers to this. And I'm not saying that every kid that grows up without a father is going to end up in prison, but 85% of the kids in prison come from fatherless households. So it's something that awareness needs to be brought to it. It's really crippling our society. And if we could just strengthen our nuclear family units, and if we could bring some God back into our focus, I think most of the problems we're seeing would really go away quickly.
I think there's a lot to that, obviously, and there's a lot of research that puts that out there. And again, no slighting to single moms out there. My parents were divorced when I was growing up, and even though I became very close to my dad during the later part of my life, I was always close to him, but I didn't see him. It's the relationship. And what do you say to parents who say, well, my husband or my child's father, they don't want to have a relationship with their child. So what would you say to that?
As far as the father doesn't want to have a relationship with the
Yeah, if the
child.
father just doesn't want to have a relationship with the child for whatever reason, maybe there is drug abuse, maybe there's mental illness, maybe there's alcoholism, and it's just not a positive thing. What would
Yeah,
you
those
respond
are
to that?
almost like what you're saying is like the deadbeat dad portion of our society, which is just a poison in our society. But what I would say to that single mom, now that the father doesn't want to be involved, is the best thing that you could do is try to find another positive male role model to get around your young son or your young daughter. And that's really the best advice that I always give to single moms. And there's a lot of, you know, who is it? James Buster Douglas, who knocked out Mike Tyson 30 years ago. He's one that started a gym, a boxing gym in Columbus, Ohio, and he was talking about how so many of the people that come in are single moms that are bringing their young boys in there to try to find some positive male role models for them because they're lacking in their life. So it's always my advice is always is that you got to try to find positive male role models for your kids.
I agree with you. And so, Alec, let me ask you, you've interviewed over 700 high profile dads. How has this experience and what you have learned from them impacted you in your own role as a father?
Well, number one, it gives me a lot of comfort knowing that you're not alone in this journey. You get to hear from dads from and one thing you find out is that we're so much more alike than we are different. We're so much more alike than the media is telling us. That's dividing us in every which way but loose. When you actually sit down and talk to dads from different backgrounds, different religions, different ethnicities, you talk to them all, and you realize in the middle of the conversation, like, I'm just like this guy. So it's comforting in that fact to know that there's so many of us out here that are going through the exact same thing,
Mhm.
and there's strength in that, and there's comfort in that. So I've taken that as a very positive thing, and that's one of the reasons why I keep doing the show, and I really love doing it because I love talking to dads that are very different from me, come from very different worlds, but we can communicate because we have this thing called fatherhood in common, and it unites us all. And parenting is something that can unite the entire country because everyone wants the same thing for their kids. They want their kids to be happy, healthy, successful, and they don't want to see them hurt, or they don't want to see them, making these bad mistakes and choices in life. So I think it's awesome. I think if we focused more on parenting and fatherhood and family, I think we'd be a better place.
I agree with you 100%, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing and what you're doing. One of the things that, as you're saying all of this, that I'm thinking about is going back to the fatherless crisis that you talked about. And I don't want anybody out there listening to think, and you already said this, but I want to just reiterate this. I don't want anybody to feel like, well, my child's father isn't in their life, and they're going to have all these issues and problems. As you said, go ahead and see if you can find some role models of someone. one of the podcasts that you did, and I listened to it yesterday with Senator Josh Hawley, and he talked about some statistics, and you don't have to give the numbers if you don't know, but he talked about even if there's not a dad in the family, even if there's a dad in the neighborhood, even if there's a dad um, that has some kind of a presence, maybe at a school, that even that makes a difference in terms of the numbers of suicides and depression and drug abuse. What thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, and that's why I would say if you show me a neighborhood that has a high record of crime, a high teenage suicide rate, a high teenage drug rate, you're going to show me a neighborhood that has a high percentage of fatherless kids. It always follows the same. It's the one statistic that you can tie into everything that we're talking about that's troubling all these neighborhoods, and that's the number one thing. So if you introduce positive male role models into the neighborhood, of course
Mhm.
it's going to make a change. If you introduce light to darkness, it makes a change, and that's what we really need, and that's what you're bringing. You when you're bringing a father figure into the life of a young man or a young woman, you're bringing light to darkness, and that's what we need more of.
And so one of the ways that you're finding to talk to people about that, you mentioned about you're an Uber driver on the weekends, and you shared with me before we started recording that you have these conversations with people that you're driving. What do you find that most of these young dads or dads that aren't dads yet, dads to be, are fearing about becoming a dad?
Well, obviously, a lot of them fear money. They say, I can't, I could barely afford to live myself. How am I going to be, how do you afford four kids? You know, so they have that fear that, that money is going to be the problem. I usually say to them, if you think it's, expensive to have kids, wait till you're 60 years old and they hit you with the bill for never having any kids. Because when you talk to people that are older in life and later in life, one of the biggest regrets they'll always tell you is that they wish that they had kids. And it's you'll never hear somebody that has kids say, oh, if my life would have been better if I just had never had kids. So it's not something that you're going to come to regret. It's something that's going to really accelerate your life, and it's a part of you that you can never unlock. So many people go through life and they're afraid to unlock what is actually going to be the best part of their lives, and they're afraid to do it because of society, because of what they're seeing, the way dads are portrayed on TV and in the movies, and all the negativity that they hear surrounding parenthood and kids. And so they're just bombarded with all these false ideas of what it means to be a father. And that's why I think, they know all these guys on the wall that I've interviewed here for being, Academy Award winners or Super Bowl MVPs. They're known for that. But who they are as fathers is far more important than who they are on a football field or who they are on the big screen, because these are influencers. We're in an influencer society. We call them influencers for a reason. And these guys need to be known as influencers for fatherhood, because if you're a young man and you hear your idol or your hero talking about, you know what, yeah, I won a Super Bowl, yeah, I won this award, but becoming a father has given me the most fulfillment in my life, that makes a change to somebody. So that's why I think it's more important to capture those stories. And that's why when these guys come on the show, I don't talk to them about their football career or about their military career. I talk to them about their fatherhood journey, and that's what I think is most important.
What a gift. What a gift, for everybody in the world to be able to hear these conversations. And we're going to take a break right now, Alec. And when we come back, we're going to continue talking about what you're doing, First Class Fatherhood. We'll be right back. You've interviewed over 700 high profile dads, as we've already talked about, Alec. And my question for you, without giving a name, what is the most impactful, profound piece of advice or quote or thing that you've learned that has helped you the most as a father?
Well, I'll tell you that the one that really hit me the most, I think the only time really I guess maybe I could say that became emotional during an interview, I would say, is when I interviewed Larry Brown, who is the Gold Star father of Navy SEAL Adam Brown, who was killed in action, and his book Fearless, that was about his life, is one of probably. And I'm a very avid reader. I try to read at least a book a week, if not every other week. But I've read his book probably about 5, 6 times, and I've listened to the audio book a bunch of times too, just because he's a recoverer, a recovering addict, just like I am. I'm a recovering addict, alcoholic, the whole bit. And his story, he really hit me so much, and I had read it so many times, and I had reached out to his father, and I got a chance to interview his dad for Memorial Day. I think it was like 2 years ago now, and his father was telling the story about Adam growing up, about Adam dying in action, and the whole story was just it was so impactful to me. Just to then he became emotional during the interview, and it's my favorite interview that I've done on the show out of the 700, and it's just because I felt so connected to the story and just so honored that I got a chance to speak to his father. So that one really hit me. But I think as far as advice goes, I loved. I've had Kurt Warner. We talked about Kurt Warner a little bit before we started recording this, but Kurt Warner has been on the show a couple of times, and the first time he came on, one of the things he said really hit me hard, and I've kept it to this day. Is that we talk about balancing work life balance and stuff, and he said that he learned a long time ago that balance doesn't necessarily mean equal, where you can't give 8 hours a day to your job, 8 hours a day to your kids, and 8 hours a day to your wife. But when you are with your kids, be there with your kids, and when you're with your wife, be with your wife, and when you're at the job, be at the job and be focused with the time that you have there. So that kind of is a little bit refreshing, because we're kind of, especially when you have 4 kids like I do. I know he's got 7, so he knows a little bit more about balancing the time than I do. But I do find out that when I do spend a little bit of one-on-one time with my kids, it means the world to them. So even if it's just a walk to the bodega, or just a ride to the store, whatever it is, if I say, hey, you want to take a ride with me, and I pick one kid each time to do it, that isolated time for them means the world to them. So even though I can't give them all equal time, I can balance the time out with them. So I really love that advice from Kurt when he came on the show.
It's such an important concept, and you're absolutely right. So many people think, I'm working full time, I have 2 kids, 3 kids, 5, whatever. There's no way, just like you said. But one of the things that I always encourage parents too is that this thing about balance, and I don't like that word very much because it seems impossible, but it's about giving everybody what they need when they need it, and to make the most of every minute. And I just want to get, I'm not a dad, but I work with parents. Just a suggestion to parents, something as simple as, if you're in the middle of doing something and your child comes to ask you a question, tell you something, stop what you're doing, get at their eye level, look them in the eye, and make that minute and a half, 2 minutes, whatever it is, more meaningful than just standing there, yeah, okay, and continuing to do what you're doing. Those little things make children feel loved and wanted. We feel loved and wanted when someone stops to listen to us. So it's great advice from you, and also from Kurt Warner. In fact, I told you I wasn't going to tell the story, but really quickly, years and years ago, my twin boys are 21, and when they were about 8, Kurt Warner's book, and don't quote me, I think it's Family First. I should look it up. I haven't read it in a long time. It had just come out, and we were at one of the big box stores, and there was a big display of the books, and my kids were so excited. And we went over there, and I was holding the book, and I was reading something to them. And from behind us, we all of a sudden hear this man's voice say, "Hey, I hear that's a really good book." And we turned around, it was Kurt Warner. So my kids were, and they idolized him. So it's something they still talk about and very special. So do you see, and you've been doing this since 2018, and obviously you're not talking to all the fathers in the world, but from your perspective and the people you talk with in Uber, and do you feel that some of the attitudes about people wanting to be a father are changing, that more men are interested in this?
From the emails that I get, Carrie, it really is another thing that really keeps me motivated to do the podcast, because I get emails from young dads, about to be dads, all over the country, and telling me how that, whichever guy it was, Carson Palmer said this, or whoever, Dion said that, or Jason Alexander said this, and they'll pull out different things from the podcast that affected them, or that they heard that made a change in them. And so it's been so comforting to hear that, and it's always an honor when a dad reaches out. I just had a couple of moms reach out to me yesterday talking about how their husbands love the show. They wanted a message for Father's Day from me, and so it's cool that it's having an impact out there. And I've been very blessed to have so many dads willing to come on, share their fatherhood journeys, and then, of course, help me push it out, because without them, I wouldn't really have been able to even get started. Like for me, especially when you start doing a podcast, like if you have somebody like Tony Hawk comes on the show and puts the episode in his Instagram with a swipe up or with a link, that goes a lot longer way than anything I could do on my end. So I've been very blessed to have guys not only willing to come on the show, but willing to share their experience on the show through social media. So, and I think because a lot of them realize too the importance of the role of the father, not just in the family, but in the community, in our society, and in our country.
And so is that how you were able to contact 700 plus high profile people, that the people that you started with really helped you expand? Is that how it began to grow for you?
Well, I had Dean Kane, who I've become friends with, who was starred as Superman in Lois and Clark. He came on the show episode 47, and was the first celebrity that I had on the show. And he really enjoyed the conversation. And he blasted it on all his social, and it went to #1 for kids and family on iTunes that weekend. And so while it was #1, I really went hard on trying to get as many guests as I could. And that's when that same weekend, I was able to get Kurt Warner, Deion Sanders, Rob O'Neill, the SEAL who killed Osama bin Laden, and a lot of other guys. I was able to get a lot, and then I keep it up in the rankings for such a long time. And then I was able to keep getting guests. So, and plus the podcast started gaining momentum. So I really, like, again, like I said, I've been blessed to have so many great dads come on the show.
Well, it's just incredible, and you're doing such a service to the world, really. And speaking of the world, we have two questions from our viewers for you. And when we come back from our break, we're going to begin segment 4, which I like to call Your Parenting Destination. We'll be right back. This is the part of the show, as I mentioned, where we like to answer questions from our viewers for our guests. And we have two questions today, and I'm going to read them to you right now. The first one is from Lisa from Saratoga. Lisa asks, I have two sons, ages 11 and 13, and one daughter who is 10. My husband is way more overprotective with our daughter than our sons. Do you find this to be a common behavior with dads?
Well, I would say to Lisa, I have three sons, and we got our daughter on the fourth try, and she runs the show over here. And I am definitely, I discipline my three boys far different than I discipline my daughter. And we've been able to make that work because my wife picks up the discipline portion better with my daughter. And I have gotten better. She's 8 years old now, so I've gotten a little bit better at it. But yes, all of the dads that I interview, when it comes to the discipline portion of the question, all of them have this same issue with being able to come strict and hard when it comes to disciplining their daughter. That's what I have found in my own personal journey, and I've heard it from so many other dads. So that's perfectly normal. But I will say this: one of the things, and we talk about the difference in society with kids growing up. When I do ask the dads about discipline, and I say, "Hey, what type of disciplinarian are you as a dad, and is that different than the discipline style you grew up with?" I'd say 90% of the dads I've interviewed say, "Oh, it's far different. When I grew up, I got the belt, the switch, I got spanked, I got, it was severe punishment, physical punishment, but I don't do that to my kids." And they're all quick to say that.
Interesting point. And I just want to comment on that because I talk to a lot of parents one-on-one. I do my shows, and I encourage parents, think about discipline. We, like you just said, we tend to think about discipline as being strict and taking things away, and spankings, which I had when I was a little girl. Everybody did. But I encourage parents to think about discipline as the meaning of the word, which is to teach. And so it's about, how can we build our relationship with our child so that when they do something that's inappropriate, we know that it's not something we want them to do again because it's harmful or potentially harmful for them. How do we create that environment so we don't have to necessarily do what maybe our parents or dad or whatever did to us that we didn't like? And as you said, 90% of the men that you have talked with don't do that. So interesting. Okay, so our second question is from Jerry in Tulsa. And Jerry wrote, what advice or thoughts do you have for dads who didn't have a positive role model or relationship with their own father, but really want to break that cycle and turn things around with their own children. And we talked about that a little bit. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and well, first I would say find a dad that has been in your situation and has had some success. And one of those guys I would say is Titus O'Neil, who I interviewed on the show. He's a WWE superstar. He's a guy that his mother was raped when she was 11 years old and had him when she was 12 years old. And
Mm.
so grew up without a father, any father figure in his life, got himself into all kinds of trouble, was going in the wrong direction before a high school coach was able to help turn his life around. He ended up getting into football. He ended up going to college to play football, and then he ended up getting into professional wrestling. He is a massive success, multimillionaire, has a huge influence now that he's started all these other things to help out he's turned around now and helping out other young kids that have no father themselves. And he has been a massive force in this world. And it's finding somebody like that. Now he's somebody that didn't have it, but he found it through a coach. He found it, you can always find it through a teacher. Some guys find it in the military. It's the ones that are finding it in the street is why we're filling up these prisons with fatherless kids. So I would say, it's number one, just the fact that you're hoping to break the cycle is a positive thing. It means that you're facing in the right direction, Jerry. So you don't want to repeat the same mistakes. I would just say find a dad that's written a book about it, that's had this experience and been there. Success leaves clues. And so I would say that's the best thing you could do.
Excellent advice. And I would encourage people start with your book. And we're going to talk about letting people know in just a few minutes where they can find that. And so actually, let's go ahead and start to do that now, Alec. You have been, your knowledge, your wealth of talking to all these people and what you have gained from it and then sharing it with the world is simply incredible. And I thank you on behalf of mothers and fathers in the world. And we're just about out of time, unfortunately. So I'd like to ask you to take a few moments and let our viewers know, where can they find you? Where can they hear your podcast? Where can they purchase your book? Anything else you'd like to share as well?
Yeah, well, Father's Day is coming up, so it'd be a great idea, great gift if your husband or your dad has never heard about the show, introduce them to the show. It's free to listen to. It's on all the podcast platforms, iTunes mostly, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify as well. You can catch it on YouTube. Go to firstclassfatherhood.com. You'll find the whole catalog of interviews that I've done. And also the book, First Class Fatherhood, Advice and Wisdom from High-Profile Dads, makes a great Father's Day gift. It's available. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you buy books. You probably find it at your local bookstore, so it makes a great Father's Day gift. But if you just Google First Class Fatherhood, you'll find me somewhere on the ethernet.
You're everywhere. You're omnipresent there. And so I will also be, you can also find this episode if you want to share with people on my website at karikling.com, and also on my social media, Facebook and Instagram at karikling.parenting. You can also find Alec. And so I'd like to thank you again for what you are doing, for the role model that you have become for other fathers and dads to be. And I'd like to end our show today with a quote from you. And you said that all of the dads that you have interviewed, are striving to fulfill their role as a father to the best of their ability and want to encourage all other dads to do the same. Every day is Father's Day on First Class Fatherhood. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Kari. Honored to be on with you.
Thank you.